This is the vector of the current state. And when the fairy tale becomes reality, the vector of error equals 0. This is what is happening then. Therefore, by applying all of this to all processes, one can evaluate. Well, for example, here's a question. The airplane is flying. What is its goal? It must transport passengers from point A to point B. What is its second goal? It should not break down during the flight. The third goal, the passengers must be safe. The fourth goal, they need to be fed during the flight, and so on. Well, use your imagination, and this vector of goals is being fulfilled. It follows a specific route. It should consume the minimum amount of kerosene, fuel. It should fly along the optimal route. This is the vector of goals, the vector of the current state. All of this is monitored during the flight. The airplane deviated from its course. The wind blew. The pilot returns it to the correct course. It is flying according to the program. When all of this is finished, the error vector equals 0. Why did I tell this about the airplane? One can consider the ship. One can consider the company's work. I pose such a question. Can the state perhaps possibly fly into nowhere, in a manner of speaking? Probably it cannot. So if the airplane is flying into nowhere, what will happen to it if it does not know its final destination? So, what will happen? The airplane will crash. That is, it will run out of fuel, and below are swamps, mountains, or forests. It will crash. And our state, here is the vector of goals. Who among those watching now means, on the computer or video, there, on the tape recorder? Do you know where our state is flying? What is in the first place in our state? What should we achieve? What is the vector of goals? Who knows? No one knows. But if we do not know the vector of goals, it does not mean that someone with a higher level of understanding has not set their goal in relation to us. And if we look at this with the Harvard Project, compare it, what will we discover for ourselves? According to the Harvard Project, in their vector of goals, how does it look? In the first place, we must indeed seize the wealth of Russia. Well, that is, its raw materials and so on. The second goal, Russians should not understand what is happening to them. The third goal, the youth should become alcoholics, and so on. Fourth, men should perish from drunkenness, alcohol, and so on. Understood, right? And now if we look at it, it turns out that their vector of goals is being achieved towards us excellently. That is, our wealth flows to the west like a river. Gas, oil, timber, nickel from Norilsk, and so on. Moreover, the people do not understand what is happening. Men are becoming alcoholics. The goal has been achieved. Read Directive 20.1 from August 18, 1948, the materials of the Harvard Project. The USSR must be dismembered. The first phase is completed. The second is being prepared. That is the vector of the current state. And this is the vector of their high management error. If we remember during Stalin's time, here we are. In previous lectures, we already discussed what the vector of goals was in the state during Stalin's time. In the first place, that means education for everyone. All children are universal. I remember my sister studied there first. 7-year education, then 8-year, then 10-year education. Then the industry should be the best in the world. The village must provide food for its country with completely organic products. The army must be the most powerful. Science must indeed be the most advanced. And all of this was proclaimed. And all of this was being implemented. The vector of error was such that, as Vysotsky sang, there was a time when prices were lowered. And it is precisely in prices that the vector of error is expressed in the cost of goods and services. Thus, with good management, prices should be equal to 0. Where does the price come from? It arises when something is lacking. Here's an example. When there was plenty of space on the roads and parking was free. That is, you could park your car wherever you wanted and not pay. When a shortage of parking appeared, a price for that shortage immediately emerged. Therefore, if the rulers manage traffic and movement in such a way as to avoid shortages, then there would be no prices for parking. That is, soon we will have to pay for air with such a management system, like a seller of air. Do you remember the science fiction novel by Belyaev? And now let's consider, it was like this under Stalin, but they make a monster out of it. Totalitarianism, Stalin, Beria, Gulag. And what is the goal of the Democrats? What have they presented? They declared, we are building a civil society. Russians are free people, which means a just society, human rights for all. So, now let's look at the vector of the current state. So, what about human rights? What about freedom? What about democracy? Any questions? No questions. So, what? They created an illusion. Do you remember the previous picture? And they are inflating this illusion. And what is the result? All these democratizing goals have turned into a mere puff, the most ordinary. Here is how, from the perspective of the general theory of control, the processes in our life look and how they should be applied. But I want to say that these are illustrative examples, generally speaking. For entrepreneurs, especially in small and medium-sized businesses, it is always necessary to formulate what you want to achieve by managing your enterprise, company, and so on. That is, you must formulate the vector of goals and carefully monitor the vector of the current state. Your errors should be minimized. Then there will be quality management. Moreover, what is also important, and the prioritization of goals. What have you placed in the first position? What have you placed in the second? If you shift the prioritization of goals, you will get a completely different result. I would like to mention some of our supporters of the public safety concept with whom we have to work. After all, how can it be? To place it in the first position, I will put all my efforts into bringing the public safety concept to people, to society, and striving to implement it. In the second position, I will set the task of solving problems, depending on what you place first. And what second? The success of the matter depends. And many of us, seemingly supporters, as they call it, of the concept, say, I will solve my problems first, and only then, somewhere in third or fourth place, will I engage with the public safety concept. That is, a shift in priorities. Leads to corresponding results. But what is the situation? Generally speaking, there is a war going on right now. And if you are a supporter of the public safety concept, it needs to be positioned that way. I am at the front. As our fathers and grandfathers used to say, they went into the trenches as volunteers, rose up, and went into the attack. And with this framing of the question, if the vector of goals for all of us is exactly this in the first place, then we will change the situation. And when then, I still need to buy something here, there's a summer house to take care of, something else. And only somewhere in third or fourth place will I deal with the concept of public safety. So here you have the outcome of what we have. Our country is being mocked, oppressed, and its growth is being destroyed, while we are all just solving our little problems. No individual problem in the country will be solved until we change the overall concept of our society's development. Therefore, this task should be prioritized in one's personal activities. Well, at least that's what I believe. Well, down here, there is a little explanation of what I said. Here are the individual goals. You see, the most important goals are in the first place, meaning priority. Well, and here everything is also explained in general. The next important thing to know is the main elements, a fairly general theory of management, the basic conceptual apparatus, which includes the complete functions of management. What do the complete functions of management mean? This is also very important, and we will look at it later. And then I will explain it with everyday examples. The complete functions of management mean the circulation of information and the transformation of information in the management process. That is, from the very beginning of managing any process to the very end. That is, if you take on a task, you must constantly solve management tasks during the process of that task, meaning the complete function of management until you solve your task. What is the complete function of management? It is a system of stereotypes, that is, template habitual actions, relationships, and transformations between the informational modules of this system. That is, whenever you look at any process, always keep in mind the diagram that we have already discussed in the previous slides. And whatever you are considering, the diagram should look like this. Here is an example with an airplane. This airplane is the object of management. Pilot, subject of management. Environment, direct connection. Result, feedback. You could say it like this. This is a family. The head of the family. Usually it is the wives who command matriarchy. Here is the subject of management. If it is a state or a company, here is a company, a factory. The head of the company manages it. The state, this is the government bodies, the head of state. And generally speaking, one can talk about humanity. One can say this: the planet Earth, governed by the rhythms of the cosmos, the entire universe. This way, one can also reach God. Any scheme. And at the micro level, an electron is a subject of management. The nucleus of the atom attracts this electron. Primitive, of course, I understand. The law of attraction of management. The electron will not detach from the nucleus. All these processes can be considered at any level, including the rays of the sun, a little flower. The sun has risen, the flower has bloomed. The sun has risen, the flower has withered. That is, all processes, object, subject, always keep in mind. I'm not even mentioning cars, bicycles, and other clearly defined objects of management, machines, and so on. That is, the complete function of management is a system of habitual stereotypes, relationships of transformations between information modules in this system, based on which management of this object is carried out. And what are these information modules? And here we should remember what the first lecture, the trinity of matter, information, and worlds. Anything is material. Anything has order, information, and it is endowed with measure. One fragment of the universe transmits information endowed with a measure to another fragment of the universe, as a result of which the other fragment changes its informational state. This informational state alters the measure of this element in one way or another, leading to a new material content of this element. So, what are we talking about? Any transmission of information from one element to another is a controlling influence. That's what I'm doing right now, speaking into the camera. I am influencing the individuals who will watch this in a significant way. In the same way, teachers, party leaders, and church hierarchs exert control. But what is the difference between me and them? I speak about this openly, while they say, no, I am not controlling, I am advising you. Like an astrological forecast, it is laid out there, and a person, upon receiving this information, is compelled to follow it. That's it. So, he seems to say something insignificant, yet it turns out that he is in control. And for those who understand this, that is one side of the issue. And if you do this bypassing consciousness, not telling people, then you are lying. In other words, you are speaking untruths and doing wrong, to put it mildly. That is why we say that all processes in society are understood by this one, not understood by that one. The teacher controls the students. The priest, while giving a religious sermon there in the church, controls his flock and guides them. All processes are manageable, therefore management. When speaking of the complete function of management, involves certain informational modules, with the help of which all this is carried out. And management, in terms of the complete function of management, implies looking at what, here is drawn the head of a person, and here is the tongue. Well, there's a military aphorism like this in the army. Before the lower part of the head, this tongue, says anything, the upper part must think. What should the upper part of the head think before the lower part says anything? It should have an understanding of this like, first, it must assess the state of the object of management. This is the first informational module. It must be kept in mind. For example, if we are driving a car, well, let's take the car as an example. So, here is the driver. He is drawn. So, he must, I know, here is the car. I am driving it. I know its condition. Second, he must know and thoroughly understand his own condition. His own condition, that is, how I feel, my heart is not acting up. But what if, cases when drivers have heart failures and the bus driver endangers the lives of many people? That is, if you have drunk heavily, you should not get behind the wheel at all. And so on. That is, you need to know your own condition. Next, what do you need to know? You need to know the condition of neighboring interacting objects. A car is overtaking me on the left, and so on. Next, what do you need to know? The condition of the environment. What does this imply for the driver? It's raining, or there is ice on the road, or snow. That is, you also need to adjust your actions to the condition of the environment. Next, what do you need to know? You need to know the condition of the control structure. What control structure? And there is a police officer standing. The traffic light has turned on. You are neglecting it. Here is the red light, but it doesn't exist for you. Bam! You crashed, which means an accident. That is, you also need to know the instructions and restrictions of higher control structures. That is, why are you even driving? Are you fulfilling your task? Or were you sent to the market for vegetables? Or did your boss order you to take some empty bottles from one base to another? That is, there is a hierarchy of control. Again. And finally, this is all clear. And the most important thing here, you see, is the number 7. One driver. If he sees a distracted puppy, he slows to let it pass, while another driver will run over it, not stopping. This is called entertainment, that is, connection, that is, conscience, entertainment, and methodology. And all of this. Every person, if they want to manage on their own, must be able to keep all of this in their head together. So it turns out to be these 7. It has been established by science that a person can simultaneously track, well, with their mind, 7 to 9 processes. In other words, this management task is accessible to any person. If a person is unable to simultaneously keep track of the development of several processes, all of those listed at once, such a person simply has no right to manage. And now let's bridge to practice. Can a drunk person perhaps keep track of all this or not? No. Therefore, one cannot drive a car while intoxicated, and even more so, manage a state. That is why we saw that drunkard alcoholic Yeltsin, who conducted orchestras in Germany. That is why, in the concept of public safety, we say that managers have no rights. Simply put, this is not allowed. It is unacceptable, just as other people do not have rights. And in general, if it comes to that, the first thing that gets cut is entertainment. A drunk and sleepy person does not think their own thoughts. So here, in my opinion, I think this is quite obvious. Here are the absolutely comprehensive and detailed full management functions from the perspective of these information modules. A lot follows from this. To learn to hold all thoughts at the same time. Here, Pushkin has a formula again. Blessed is he who firmly governs with words and keeps his thoughts on a leash. That is, in that informational state, connect everything I have talked about with the law of time. When events, that is, phenomena in people's lives change often, a person must quickly assess this situation. So, if you are not capable, do not master the methodology. You will not be able to track all of this. Therefore, perceive all of this together. You can only do this by having entertainment and quickly separating the necessary from the unnecessary. After all, even, let's say, if we take the same driver, there are primary things that the driver must pay attention to, and there are many secondary factors that do not determine the successful completion of tasks by the driver. Right. So the driver can, let's say, drive, and the one who does not have this entertainment sees a ball rolling, a bird somewhere, and he will crash. There is an external factor and external influences. He must, with great skill and care, skillfully self-manage and keep his thoughts in check. Speaking about public processes, state-level leaders must be able to connect all these processes of the state's condition, including all the possible neighboring states, This means knowing global politics, how it is carried out, the management hierarchy, and being in harmony with God. But for many, the understanding is that God is just standing with a candle as a candlestick in church, like Lushkov, and that's where it ends. He built the church of the Savior and thinks he is with God. This is not the case at all, far from it. This is a very serious matter. And a leader, if he wants to manage himself, must be able to keep all of this together in his mind. But the complete function of management also involves a sequence of actions. This is not only what we have discussed. This picture illustrates this sequence of actions. What is shown here? First, you need to be able to identify the environmental factor that affects your system. Here an airplane is depicted. Imagine you are a pilot. You are flying. Although you can take anything. You can take a state, a company, a car. You can take a family. You can take your factory, anything you want. Identifying the environmental factor. Here is the airplane. A gust of wind has blown. It is necessary for the entire system and the pilot to understand that the wind is blowing on him, not that a projectile is flying or a missile has been launched at him that could shoot down the airplane, and that the wind is blowing. Second, the pilot must not flinch every time there is a gust of wind that shakes his airplane. It is necessary to form a stereotype for recognizing this factor for the future. This is particularly done for the airplane by the autopilot mode. What's next? There must definitely be a formation of goal vectors. In relation to each factor affecting the system and incorporating it into the overall goal vector, well, and you remember here is the list drawn up. In the first place, the airplane must safely transport passengers. During the flight, it must not deviate from the route. In third place, minimum fuel consumption. In fourth place, the cargo must be preserved and so on. It must handle wind gusts. And there are many, many more specific goals in this goal vector. So the formation of the goal vector, what's next? Now I need to accomplish all of this, but then the question arises, how to do it? Therefore, the next fourth point answers this question. Formation of the objective function. This is a term in mathematics, specifically applied mathematics, or in simpler terms, concepts. And conceptio, if translated in relation to our system, means the idea of management in the Russian language, that is, how to achieve the intended goal, how to make a fairy tale come true, that is, how to take off, which route to fly, how passengers should behave, where to turn, what to do. Consider the management concept. That's it. Consider the management concept. The fifth. It is necessary to organize a structure that would implement all of this. That is, it is necessary to monitor the pilot's preparation, to ensure that radars track the pilot, and that the airfields are ready. That is, a whole structure that would ensure the management of the aircraft's flight. What's next? It is necessary to have control over the activities of the structure during the management process. Well, starting from the ministry, which is now called JSC, it used to be the Ministry of Civil Aviation and so on. This includes pilot training, exams, control and certification, etc. Seventh, maintaining the operability of the structure. This means it is necessary to retrain pilots, repair aircraft, extend their service life, and so on. Or liquidation if the structure is no longer needed. This is indeed all part of the complete management function. Points 1.7 are always present if you typically work and want to manage the object yourself. According to the complete management function, if you neglect any of these points, your system will break down sooner or later. Well, let's put it this way. Perhaps you took off, the wind blew at you, and you don't know that it's the wind, lightly. Or a missile was launched at you, and you think, this is not mine, I don't want to know about it. The plane will perish. If you haven't defined or changed the priority of target vectors, then where exactly are you flying at this moment? Can a plane fly nowhere in the sky? It cannot. Sooner or later it will crash. If a management concept hasn't been developed, then you don't know how to do it. What does it mean? To ensure the ceiling of the airplane, how to keep the passengers there, and so on, you also won't accomplish the task set. If there is no management structure, then you also won't receive information about where you are, how things are, and so on. This is clear. Therefore, if a person in charge wants to manage the object themselves, they must always independently resolve all these 7 points. The full function of management can only be realized in an intellectual management scheme, which implies the creativity of the management system. That is, the manager is obliged to resolve such issues. Here they are listed. Look. Identify the environmental factors that affect his system and how to identify them. If you don't have a creative approach, you won't identify what affects you, a competing firm or the state, if you don't understand global politics, forming goal vectors. Forming goal vectors, what is that? It's also a creative process. That is, the manager must sit down and think, okay, I need to do this first, then that. No, I must do this first. That is creativity. Forming a management concept, that is, how to do all this, with what forces, with what means, along which route to fly, how to arrange people, improving the methodology of forecasting, managing this process. All of this implies creativity, and creativity implies the presence of intelligence, that is, the ability to independently develop new informational modules. Let's talk about developing new information modules ourselves. Now if